Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's operator meeting. My name is Hannah Hickam, and I will be your host. If you have any questions throughout the presentations, please drop those in the chat, and we'll make sure to answer all of those at the end of the presentations. Up first, we have interwell distance descriptions and hearing applications, and Alex Axe will be presenting, but first I need to give them the opportunity to unmute, so give me just a moment for that.
All right, I seem to be unmuted. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can. Awesome, thanks.
All right, so this is just a hopefully brief announcement. I'm Alex Axe. I'm with the permitting group, and I've been doing a lot of work on hearing applications. And this is particularly in regards to applications for drilling and spacing units or, modifications thereof. Prior to basically this year, it's been kind of like the tradition that the language for interwell spacing has been, let's see, each horizontal well will be no closer than 150 feet from the productive interval of any other horizontal well, but sometimes I've seen it just say any other well, with the understanding that we're only counting horizontal wells producing from the same formation or common source of supply within the unit, unless an exception is granted by the director. So in our kind of brave new world of having DSUs that can overlap, the within the unit language is not really appropriate anymore, since we could technically speaking have two units sitting on top of each other, and if we're only spacing to things within the unit, you could see how that could get a little hairy. So moving forward, and we've already been asking people to do this when we've been seeing it in applications that have come in, the more appropriate language is to have your interwell distance relative to the productive interval of any other horizontal well, producing from the same formation or common source of supply, period. No in the unit, just any other horizontal well. So that's all that is just take away the in the unit language.
Great, thank you so much. And up next is well status changes. I'm Jane Stanczyk, and I think, Chris, do you have her slides?
I do, yes, and I will share them now.
There you go.
Okay, you should be good, Jane.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Hannah. Good morning, everybody. I just have a couple slides here to talk about changing or updating the status of a well. Hannah or Chris, first slide, please. So this is a repeat of what I talked about with changing well classifications in the new financial assurance framework. We needed 3 different ways to talk about wells. So we have classification, status, and then the new category of designation. And these are all pretty important now because the new financial assurance rules refer to well classifications and well statuses. And so it's important for them to be accurate. It's the operator's responsibility to make sure that the classification and statuses of their wells are correct and accurate all the time. And to help implement the new financial assurance rules, we've made some changes to how the well status gets updated in the database. A while back, we talked about how to correct well classification, but with a sundry, but that does not apply to changing well status. Next slide, please, Chris. So here's just a summary of where we are, what we have. We have well classification, which is essentially what is the well used for, or in other words, what kind of well is it? We have well status, which is the physical or operational condition or state of the well. And then to implement the new rules, we created these well designations. The well designations are all automatically done within the database. Next slide, please, Chris. So the new rules added a new definition, and that's for a suspended operations well. It's in the 100 series rules. It means a well that's been spud and but not drilled all the way to TD. So a portion of the well has been drilled, and then the drilling ceased, the rig down moved off, and now the well's sitting there. An example of this is drilling your surface hole, setting surface casing with a smaller rig, and then waiting to move back on the well with a big rig to drill it all the way to TD. So the new status is suspended operations, abbreviated as capital S, capital O. We've added it to the Form 7, which is the monthly report of operations required for every well from the time it's spud until it's been plugged and then reported plugged for a month. So this is the correct status after you've drilled a portion of the well. And what it means is that the drilling status, which we used to use for this physical state and operational condition of the well, we used to have used drilling status for all of this. And now that we have this new definition and a new status, the drilling status is only accurate when the rig is rigged up, drilling, rigged down. Once it's gone, then, and you have not drilled all the way to TD, the correct status is suspended operations. Next slide, please, Chris. We've also added active status to the Form 7, and that is the correct status all the time for observation, domestic, gas storage, and stratigraphic wells. The Form 7 will now automatically update the database and also update what's then displayed on the scout card for the statuses of active, drilling, injecting, producing, shut-in, suspended operations, temporary abandoned, and waiting on completion. For the status of active permit, and then of course the corresponding status of expired permit, only the Form 2 updates those. Only the Form 4 updates the abandoned location status, and only an approved Form 6 subsequent updates the PA status. But all those statuses listed there on the first line are updated with the Form 7. If the operator or staff determines that a status is incorrect, the correction happens by the operator submitting one or more revised Form 7s for the well. Dry and abandon is no longer a status, it's a well classification. Same thing for domestic. DM is not a status, it's a well classification. The status of a dry and abandoned well is plugged and abandoned. Next slide, please, Chris. Oh, that was it. That's all I had. Just send your questions into the chat. And so I guess, Chris, if you could drive a little bit on our website for me. So these slides will be posted, of course, in the operator meeting archive, but I think since this new importance or increased importance of the correct status and the correct classification having a bearing on financial assurance, I think we need to post these slides and the ones from a few weeks ago about well classification. I think we need to post them with the Form 3 instructions. So Chris, if you could go to regulation and then to forms, and then to the Form 3, which is all about financial assurance plans. I think we'll put them here in the form instructions just because of the impact they have on your financial assurance for your wells. So we'll get those posted later today or tomorrow, soon. That's it. Thanks, Chris.
Good.
Great, thanks, Jane. Next up, we have Form 5B and Form 5C, and that's Diane McCoy. And give me just a moment to cue that up. But Diane, you should be able to unmute yourself by now.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay, Hannah?
I can, thank you.
Perfect.
And let me also share. All right, take it away.
All right. My name is Diane McCoy. I'm going to be talking about the newly released Forms 5B, the inactive well notice, and the 5C, the inactive exception request. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to go over a quick overview of some definitions from our rule related to inactive well information, then how to create the new Form 5B inactive well notice in web forms, and create the Form 5C inactive exception request in web forms, and then wrap up with some questions. Next slide, please. So within our 100 series rules, inactive well is defined, and there's different definitions for different status. So if you have a shut-in well for 12 consecutive months, it's now defined as inactive. If you have a TA well for 6 consecutive months, it is now defined as inactive, and different criteria for different well statuses there. Next slide, please. And then within Rule 434, it says that any well that once it's defined as inactive must be plugged and abandoned within 6 months, unless the operator returns the well production, files a Form 5B inactive well notice, and then has the proper financial assurance to go along with that, files a Form 5C inactive exception request, or files a Form 6A with that well listed on there to designate that well as out of service. Next slide, please. Now we're going to go over how to create the Form 5B in web forms. Next slide. So in web form dashboard, as with any of your forms, you start by clicking your new form link at the top, then select the form type that you want to create. So in this instance, we're doing the 5B, and every operator should have these in your web forms already now. They were released over the weekend. So if you look at your available forms, the 5B and 5C should be there. So select the 5B, click create, go to the next slide, please, Hannah. Then the wizard pops up for which well you need to submit the Form 5B on. You add that API and click save. Next slide, please. And then you get the pop-up saying you're trying to create a new Form 5B. Here's your operator number, here's your API. Is this information correct? If you've got the correct well in there, go ahead and click yes, and then your new form will pop open to start editing and creating that Form 5B. Next slide. So the first tab, as always, is your well information tab. A lot of that information comes in grayed out based off what you submitted in the wizard. You just need to add the contact information onto that slide or onto that tab. Next slide, please. So the inactive well notice tab, this is where most of the information is contained within the new Form 5B. The top part, the inactive well notice type, is based off what has already been reported to our database. So this is going to be pretty much off of your Form 7 reporting, and it's automatically selected as what has made this well being defined as inactive. And then the next part is you need to provide a reason why the well is inactive. It's a large text box data field, so provide details to make this as clear and complete as possible. We're looking for why it's inactive, how long it's been inactive, the time it's expected to remain inactive, any discussion about financial assurance specifically to this well, all that details can get put in there. And then there's information that's pulled in again from our database based off the previously financial assurance forms submitted by the operator. And then the last data field on this tab is a question that has a drop down for a yes or no. So does the operator's current financial assurance plan require additional or different financial assurance for this well? So go ahead and select the correct answer for that for this well. It's a yes or no. Next slide, please, Hannah. Submit tab, very similar to all of our submit tabs on our web forms. So a spot to provide additional comments if needed, and then your submitter's information, and go ahead and validate your information, save and submit your form. Next tab, please, or tab slide. So for the Form 5B, it's an inactive well notice, so it's submitted as a notice. There is no in-process stage. There is no staff review. Once it's submitted, it automatically comes into our database as approved. So it's very similar to how our Form 17 and Form 42 work. And just some clarifications here. If the well is already designated as out of service, we do not need a Form 5B for it because its designation is now out of service. If the operator will be planning to submit a 5C, an inactive exception request for the well, do not submit the Form 5B, use the 5C. We don't need both of those for the same well. Next slide, please. And now we're going to go over how to create the new Form 5C, the inactive exception request in web forms. Next slide. So same thing, your web form dashboard, you create new form, select the Form 5C and click create. Next slide, please. It'll take you to the same kind of wizard pop-up. You make sure you have the correct operator number if it's not automatically populated for you. The API for the well that the exception request is being submitted for. Click save. You'll get that same pop-up asking you to confirm if the information you've input is correct. And if it is, go ahead and say create and save, and then your new form will open. Next slide, please. So I went ahead and just skipped the well information tab on this because it's pretty much the same. Make sure you get the contact information submitted. Your well information is all based off what you supply in that wizard during form creation. So on the inactive exception request, again, the inactive checkbox is input by our database. So whatever has been reported on your Form 7s, it'll select that automatically for you. And then you need to provide a demonstration for why it's not properly designated as inactive. So this is an exception request to the inactive definition. So we need lots of details here. At a minimum, we're looking for why it's been reported that it's inactive, when is it expected to return to production, any recent MIT or brainhead test information, how the well is being monitored, plans for this well, anything that would help us review this exception request. And this will then get routed for engineering staff to review. Next slide, please. It also has an attachments tab, so you can add a inactive exception demonstration to provide additional information if it's more helpful to have that as an attachment than only in the text box. So this could be provided with any additional request. Next slide, please. And then you have your submit tab again with your comment box like always. So again, if you want to provide any additional text comments that did not fit into the previous tab or that you did not include as an attachment, you can supply it here. You go ahead and validate, save, submit your form, and then the Form 5C will come across. And that one, like I said, will get routed to engineering staff for review. And then we'll let you know if we need anything else. I think that's all I have. Hopefully no surprise slides at the end. Awesome.
Great, thanks, Diane. Next up, we have Sabrina. And I don't remember what that topic is, so just one moment. It is Form 4 web forms data. And Sabrina, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
And thank you. Just another few moments. All right, take it away.
Okay, so this prompt is from Penny Garrison, came up sort of late yesterday, so I apologize if I run through it quickly. I put this together fairly late last night and I was a little bit tired. How to make sure your Form 4 gets seen and reviewed by staff. Next slide, please, Hannah. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain here. Certain data fields that are in the Form 4 sundry notice will trigger business rules that happen within web forms. So some of those data fields, if you activate those fields, web forms will create a task for a staff member to review. So in this example, whatever buttons and checkboxes were made in the form created a task for an engineer and created a task for permitting. When staff goes into review forms, they can sort in web forms out of the thousands of forms that we receive. They can sort for permits that have been automatically assigned to them. That is very common practice. That's usually how people access the forms and know which forms are their responsibility to review. Next slide, please, Hannah. So if you are ever curious about which work unit gets assigned based on which checkboxes you check in the form, this is sort of a general guideline. It's not the exact business rules, but generally speaking, any checkbox or drop-down field that's activated on the well location change tab, the formation and spacing tab, or the well logs upload tab will automatically create a task for a permitting review. If you activate certain data fields on the engineering and environmental tab or gas capture tab or casing and cementing tab, that will create a task for engineering review, also potentially environmental review and OGLA review. If you activate the right checkboxes on the reclamation tab or H2S reporting tab, it will create a task for a reclamation staff member or an environmental staff member. And if you activate checkboxes in the oil and gas location updates tab or the proposed OGDP changes tab, it will automatically assign a task to an OGLA staff member. Next slide, please, Hannah. So there are certain checkboxes and data fields that are vague enough in the form that web forms doesn't know who to assign, doesn't know which work unit to assign it to. So it'll assign what we call a routing review. This is an example of routing review. Routing review generally goes to a permitter. So in this example, it's been assigned to Fenton Buchanan. And this is basically an assignment that says, web forms doesn't know who to look at it, so it's going to tell permitters to go look at it. So Fenton, in this case, will go and look up the form, will read the data in the form and decide which work unit at COGCC actually needs to be the person doing the technical review on this. Next slide, please, Hannah. So we do have a backlog of Form 4s that were submitted with a lot of blank data. In these cases, none of the right checkboxes were checked to enable web forms to automatically create and assign a task. So since no tasks have been assigned and no one specific person has been assigned to review it, those forms just kind of sit in web forms and get ignored. In many cases, it's just nothing more than the operator has added a submit tab comment. Text boxes and text-only data fields do not trigger those business rules because web forms doesn't quite have the capability to search keywords. It takes a person to read those words to figure out where the proper routing needs to go. Next slide, please. So you have a couple of options to sort of trick web forms into assigning a task so that somebody will review your form. The first option is on the Other tab. There's a checkbox near the bottom of that tab that says Documents Submitted. If you check that box, it will assign a task for routing review. So a permitter will go in and look at that form. The caveat with this is that if you check that box, you also have to attach a document. So you can't just check this box just to create the task. You actually have to attach a document when you check that box. Next slide, Hannah. Your other option is on the engineering and environmental tab. About halfway down that page, there's a checkbox for notice of intent request for approval. If you check that box, the business rules, I believe, will force you to enter your approximate start date. And I think also the business rules built in will force you to check one of the boxes below, describing what you are intending or what you are requesting. In the example shown here, the checkbox for other has been selected, and then there's some text typed in that it's an air monitoring report. So if you check the notice of intent or request for approval box and you add a date and you check one of the boxes below, this will create a task for an engineering review or a routing review. I can't quite remember because I don't actually process a lot of these anymore, but that will create a task and somebody will be assigned to review your form. I think that's my last slide, Hannah. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sabrina. And yeah, we'll just wait for some questions. We do have one first one for Alex. Your instructions only apply to DJ basin wells, correct or right?
Okay, so technically speaking, the instructions actually apply to all drilling and spacing unit applications throughout the state. However, since the only place people are drilling horizontal wells is really the DJ basin, it is functionally just for the DJ basin. However, if you start spacing for horizontal wells outside the DJ, then you're also going to need to take into consideration this is not just for the unit, it is interwell spacing that applies to all horizontal wells. Hopefully that clears that up.
Great, thank you, Alex. The next question is, what is the impact of the Form 5B and 5C on the wells designation?
So we have the defined inactive based off of Form 7s that were reported and based off of your 100 series rules. And then the Form 5B and 5C can label that as designated inactive or like noticed inactive, and then a inactive exception. So those change that designation a little bit, where you have the first one is, defined inactive, and then we have designated inactive and inactive exception.
Thanks, Diane. The next question is, while you showed how a well status can be changed, how does a well class get corrected?
I can answer that one, Hannah. I gave a presentation a couple weeks ago about correcting the well classification. It requires a sundry, a Form 4 sundry notice. And as I mentioned earlier, we will post that presentation about correcting the well classification, and the one I just gave you about how the status of a well gets set. We'll post those where Hannah's driving to in the archives for these operator meetings, but also we'll go ahead and put them in the instructions for the Form 3, since we're talking about this in the context of the impact on the financial assurance for wells. And yeah, Hannah, I don't think it was that long ago.
No, okay.
It was much more recently. Keep going up.
One of these. Oh, here. There you go.
Yeah, right there. What date was that? On October 25th.
Yeah.
So it's a couple weeks ago. So that presentation is right now available in the archive of these operator meeting presentations.
I'm just going to drop that into the chat for folks.
Thanks, Hannah.
You're welcome.
And I have one comment on Diane's answer, just a little extra piece of information, the answer about the impact of the Form 5B and the 5C on the wells designation. Since the Form 5B is a notice, as soon as that form is submitted, it will add the noticed inactive designation to the well. but the Form 5C requires the engineering staff to review and determine if an exception is appropriate, and then it's the approval of the 5C that would add the designation of inactive exception to the well.
Thanks, Jane. We'll give folks a few more minutes to type their questions in. While we're just giving folks time to type questions, and if they have any more, we'll go ahead and advance my slide. So the next one, we've gone ahead and added extra dates, mostly through the end of the year, but we're not going to mess with that week between Christmas and New Year's. So mostly through the end of the year, though. December 20th will be the last weekly one that's scheduled so far, and then we'll add more weekly ones as they're needed. But we will have weekly meetings through November and most of December. So here's the dates there, and they'll be in the next invite that I send out if you're more of a copy paste type. And then, yeah, I think we'll just go ahead and wrap up. I don't see any more questions. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Jay.
I just have one piece of information that might be useful to folks that are listening. So now that a lot of operators have filed their Form 3s, those are in, they'll be reviewed, but people are asking me about sending in their, additional financial assurance. They've completed their Form 3, they see that the amount that's now required is greater than the amount they had previously, and so they're asking about sending their additional financial assurance in. So just a reminder, or a couple reminders, the rules say that any additional financial assurance required is not due until 90 days after the plan has been approved. So your Form 3, your plan is in, and it'll be reviewed and either approved by the director, or if it required a hearing, it'll go through the hearing process. But the additional financial assurance is not due immediately, and we are working on creating a new form that will be used to submit the financial assurance. That will be the Form 3A. It's still being developed. So there's just a little bit of a lag time here for the review and the approval of the plans, and then the due date for the actual financial assurance. So just a little clarification there. Thank you, Hannah.
Thanks, Jane. All right, and still no more questions, so we'll just go ahead and wrap up. Thank you everyone for being here. If you need to be added to the operator email list, please email me at this email address here and I will add you to the list. If you have any questions about this stuff, email Jane directly. If you email me, I'm not going to be able to help you because Jane is the expert and I am not. And with that, we appreciate you being here and have a great day. Bye-bye.